Okay, next up is Brian Fitzgerald. Brian is an assistant professor in the accounting group.
All right, let's start the. All right, countdown has started. So, as Emery mentioned, my name is Brian Fitzgerald, and I'm an assistant professor in the accounting group. And in a nutshell, what my research focuses on is behavioral determinants of audit judgment. Now, why is this important? Well, an auditor provides an opinion on a client's financial statements, which then improves the perceived credibility of that information to the market. Now, in performing the auditor must exercise significant amounts of professional judgment. And in doing, and specifically in areas that are subjective in nature. And what we find from the regulator is that auditors aren't very good at this process. Specifically, we see many instances where there are noted deficiencies. And what I've tried to do in my research is identify root causes of those concerns. Specifically, what I've looked at is how do client relationship incentives affect auditor judgment? And then how do auditors deal with management's stated preference? What do they do in those situations? And how can we get them to be de-biased in those instances? And then finally, how do they integrate advice from other parties within the audit firm? How does that affect their professional judgment? And then finally, what I've looked at most recently is how do the characteristics of the individual auditor affect their judgment? And that's what I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about today. Now, in all of these papers, what I'm trying to do is figure out how can we improve audit quality and by improving the professional judgment of the individuals performing the audit. So the paper that I'm going to talk about is entitled Evaluating Internal Controls. Does Being Smart Matter? Now, this is a paper that I've co-authored with Chris Wolf in the accounting department at Texas A&M and with Ryan Zimmerman, who's in the management department at Virginia Tech. Now, what all organizations would like to do would be to hire the best and the brightest individuals. But now, who are they in the audit world? We'd like to think they're the ones who make the best professional judgment. But we know surprisingly little about who they are. We do know, though, that investors and audit partners see that the quality of the individual performing the audit is one of the most important indicators of high-quality audits. Further, we see that the regulator routinely notes that the judgment of the individual auditor is usually the cause of problems that they note in their inspection reports. So what we study here are individual auditor characteristics. And what we do is we ask a sample of professional auditors to evaluate a couple of scenarios in an experimental setting where they identify where they evaluate whether or not the client's financials are the client's internal control system, so the policies and procedures that they have in place are appropriate for the setting. And what we do is we analyze how those responses map to a set of measures of their cognitive ability as well as their personality traits. So by cognitive ability, research has primarily focused on measures of general intelligence. However, there are other measures as well, such as how deeply they look at a problem's features. That's what we mean by cognitive reflection. And then also, how do they go about approaching a problem? What's their thinking style? We also look at their personality traits. So are they agreeable? Are they more agreeable, more conscientious? Would they be considered highly emotional stable? Are they extroverts? How open are they in general? Now, what we expect is that experience is going to moderate what personality traits are important at what time in their career. research shows that absent experience, individuals tend to rely on heuristics in evaluating a problem. And these heuristics would be largely rooted in the personality traits that they have inherent to themselves. So what we expect is that personality traits are largely going to influence the judgment of inexperienced auditors. Now, for experienced auditors, though, what we expect is that cognitive ability is going to matter more. Reason being is that what research shows is that over time, people with greater cognitive ability are better able to transfer those experiences into knowledge, which then improves their performance on a task. So as I mentioned, we perform a case-based experiment with measures of the cognitive ability and the personality traits as well. What we find, as expected, is that experienced auditors who exhibit better judgment tend to be ones who have higher cognitive reflection ability. So these are the ones who are better able to see past surface level assessments and more deeply analyze the problem. They're also ones that tend to have what we call a rational logical thinking style. Again, these are the people who work consciously through the problems as opposed to relying on what they would call an intuitive experiential approach. Now, for less experienced auditors, what we see is that instead of the measures of cognitive ability, what we find is that their judgment is rooted more in their personality traits. Specifically, we find that those who are more conscientious exhibit better judgment, as well as those who rank higher on emotional stability. So those people that are less influenced by the potential answers of the client as to why the situation is the way it is. Finally, we actually surprisingly find that people who rank lower on openness also exhibit better judgment in the audit setting. And what we attribute this to is openness is usually inversely related to conservatism in a lot of studies. Conservatism being obviously a hallmark of accounting information. So what do we learn from this? First off, we identify a set of measures that are associated with better quality judgment in the audit setting. And these measures can be used by audit firms in identifying who are likely to be the best performers, and also in their promotion and mentoring decisions. What we also do is we identify this project of judgment maturation such that auditors over time tend to use different skills, and this helps explain how these skills are used by auditors differently over the course of their professional career. So that's just one example of my research. I'd be happy to answer any questions people have about the other papers that I briefly alluded to at the start, but didn't have time to discuss at today's presentation. So thank you.
Thank you.